Sherlock Holmes. The Murder at Table 12. Chapter 1. It was on a cloudless afternoon in June, beneath the blazing canopy of a rare London heatwave, that Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves seated at the open-air terrace of the Imperial Victoria Hotel, a stately establishment overlooking the bustle of Hyde Park. Holmes, uncharacteristically attired without his usual Inverness cape, toyed with the stem of a coffee cup, his gaze roving the crowded tables with idle calculation. I was midway through a leisurely account of an army acquaintance recently returned from the Sudan when the peculiar event occurred. The terrace was lively. Gentlemen in straw hats, ladies with gloved hands shading their eyes, the clatter of silverware, the murmur of gossip, and somewhere beyond it all, the distant thrum of carriage wheels on the park road. Yet all of it came to a sudden halt, or so it seemed to me, when a man at table 12 rose to his feet. I noticed him purely because of the way he moved, as if uncertain whether he meant to stand at all. He was an unremarkable figure, middle-aged, slight, dressed in dark summer serge, and yet something about the tension in his posture pulled the eye. He placed a heavy black folder on the table, glanced once over his shoulder, and then he vanished. There is no other word for it. One moment he was there, hesitating by his chair. The next, nothing. No scramble through the crowd, no lurch towards the gate, no ducking behind the potted palms. It was as if the sun had simply burned him away. I half rose from my own chair in astonishment. "Holmes!" I exclaimed. "Did you see?" But Holmes was already moving. His coffee cup clattered onto the saucer, forgotten. With 3 swift strides, he reached table 12, his sharp eyes darting over the deserted seat, the black folder, the untouched drink that glistened in the heat. I hurried after him, heart pounding with a mingling of confusion and excitement. Holmes circled the table once, then dropped to a knee, examining the ground. His fingers brushed the flagstones lightly, almost tenderly, as if feeling for some hidden thread. There was a brief, tense silence as the other patrons noticed the disturbance. Heads turned. Murmured speculation rose like steam from the terrace. Waiter approached, flustered. "Sir, is there a problem? Shall I fetch the manager?" Holmes rose smoothly, brushing the dust from his trousers. "Perhaps you should," he said, his voice mild but edged. "Tell him Mr. Sherlock Holmes requests his immediate attention." The waiter blanched and scurried away. I turned my gaze back to the black folder. It sat innocently on the table, bound in cracked leather. Holmes opened it with a single, precise movement. Inside, there were 3 items. A faded carte de visite bearing no name, only the embossed words Chamber of Antiquities, Regent Street, a folded sheet of paper, densely covered with tightly packed handwriting, and a small key, gleaming even in the fading afternoon sun. Holmes said nothing, but I saw the slight narrowing of his eyes, the taut line of his mouth. Signs, to those who knew him, that some peculiar calculus was already racing through his mind. The manager arrived, a florid, perspiring man named Mr. Henry Prattle. He approached at a half-run, dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief. "Mr. Holmes," he panted. "Such an honour. Such an unexpected pleasure. Whatever is amiss?" Holmes wasted no time. "You had a guest seated here at a table 12, he said briskly. "A man of average height, wearing dark serge. He left abruptly. I require his name, his address, and the circumstances of his reservation." Prattle blinked. "Sir, that is most odd. I do not recall such a gentleman." Holmes's brows rose ever so slightly. "You do not recall," he said softly. "Despite the terrace being near capacity, and every table requiring prior booking during this fashionable season, I assure you," Prattle stammered, twisting his handkerchief, "each table is carefully assigned. But table 12—" He broke off, pulling a small leather-bound ledger from his jacket. He flipped it open with trembling fingers. "Table 12, yes. Reserved today at noon by—" "Ah!" He hesitated. His eyes widened. "There is no entry, Mr. Holmes. It appears table 12 was not reserved at all." I stared at him in disbelief. "You mean the man simply sat himself without your knowledge?" "No, Doctor. It is impossible. The staff would have noticed. There is protocol." Holmes lifted a hand, silencing him. "Send for your head waiter and the maitre d'," he said coolly, "and instruct your staff to close the terrace gates. No one is to leave until I say so." "But the police will be here momentarily," Holmes added. "Unless you wish Scotland Yard to take charge of your fine establishment in front of your distinguished clientele." Prattle paled. "At once, Mr. Holmes." As he fled, Holmes turned to me. His expression was unreadable. "Watson," he murmured, "observe, an impossible event in plain daylight, before dozens of witnesses. Yet not a single one saw the vanishing act. A seated man who leaves no trace. A reservation that does not exist." "And the folder?" I asked. Holmes closed it carefully. "A message, perhaps," he said, "or a trap." He smiled thinly. "Either way, my dear fellow, I fancy the game is afoot." Chapter 2. It was not long before Holmes's commands transformed the vibrant terrace into a tense tableau of whispered speculation and darting glances. The gates were closed, the diners corralled politely yet firmly by the staff, and two bewildered constables stood guard at either end of the colonnade. Holmes, meanwhile, had retreated to a quieter alcove of the terrace, the black folder laid reverently upon a side table. He crouched beside it with a surgeon's delicacy, examining every crease and corner. I watched him silently, acutely aware of the oppressive heat pressing down upon us, of the thin veil of perspiration upon the back of my own neck. Finally, with a low hum of interest, Holmes extracted the folded sheet of paper and unfolded it. Fully, the handwriting was minuscule, densely packed and somewhat frantic. A looping, urgent hand that bore signs of recent haste. I leaned closer, squinting at the spidery scrawl. "The truth lies sealed beyond the keyhole of remembrance. Beware table 12. Beware the one who smiles with no teeth. They are not who they seem." Holmes tapped the words lightly with one slender finger. "Curious," he mused. "An instruction, or a warning? Perhaps both." I frowned. What could it mean, Holmes? The one who smiles with no teeth. Some sort of riddle? More than a riddle, Watson, Holmes said, rising to his feet. It is a cipher of character. Observe, the keyhole of remembrance likely alludes to something hidden behind memory. Perhaps a locked compartment, a hidden room, or an old deception. And table 12, I pressed. Holmes smiled faintly. We stand upon a chessboard, my dear fellow. The pieces are not yet visible, but the first move has been made. At that moment, Mr. Prattle reappeared, his complexion several shades paler, accompanied by the maitre d' and the head waiter. Holmes questioned them with brisk efficiency. No, none of them had seen the man sit down. No staff member had seated him or taken an order. No, there had been no reservation for table 12, yet no one had questioned the occupied table because, as the maitre d' sheepishly admitted, he looked as though he belonged, sir. Some men have that manner about them. Holmes's gaze sharpened. And the guests, anyone familiar? The staff exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, the head waiter, a wiry man with prematurely grey hair, spoke up. There was a gentleman, sir, sitting at table 11, just there by the railing. Came in alone. Kept his eyes on the man at 12. Holmes's nostrils flared slightly. Describe him. Brisk-looking, sir. Dark hair, neat beard, well-dressed, left hurriedly, just before you. Gave orders to close the gates. Holmes turned sharply toward the terrace exit, but it was too late. If the mysterious observer had fled in those first moments of confusion, he was long gone now. Still, I saw in Holmes's posture no frustration, only a deeper intensity, as though the vanishing of one suspect confirmed the stakes of the game, rather than discouraged him. We shall find him again, Holmes murmured. Of that I am certain. He turned back to Mr. Prattle. Tell me, he said, has anything unusual occurred at the hotel in the past week? Missing items, strange guests? Prattle hesitated, then nodded. There was one matter, Mr. Holmes, though I hesitate to trouble you with it. 3 days ago, an envelope arrived addressed to the management. No name, simply to the proprietor. Inside was a letter requesting the reservation of table 12 for today, under the name Mr. Ambrose. No other information. I thought it an odd formality for an outdoor table, and when no one came forward to claim it, I assumed it a prank. Holmes's eyes gleamed. You have this envelope still? I believe so, sir. I shall fetch it. Within minutes, Prattle returned with the item, a thick, cream-coloured envelope, sealed with a smear of deep red wax, bearing the imprint of a serpent devouring its own tail. An Ouroboros. Holmes took it gingerly, turning it in his fingers. Watson, he said softly, note the symbol. Self-destruction. Eternity. An ancient emblem used by secret societies and by certain criminal circles when a warning is intended. He slit the envelope open with his pocket-knife. Inside, apart from the letter Prattle had described, was another folded sheet, this one smaller and finer. Upon opening it, Holmes's brow furrowed slightly. Written in the same cramped hand were only 3 words. It begins now. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The bustling murmur of the terrace seemed far away, as though we stood in some silent chamber outside of time. Finally, I said, my voice lower than I intended, "Holmes, what begins?" Holmes did not answer immediately. He folded the note carefully, pocketing it along with the key and the other message. Then he turned to me with a look I had only rarely seen upon his face, a glint of genuine anticipation, sharpened by the keen edge of danger. "Whatever it is, Watson," he said, "we have been invited to play our part, and when the curtain rises—" He glanced back once toward the abandoned table 12, the folder still resting there like an accusation. "We must be ready to act." At that instant, a commotion erupted near the street entrance. A small figure, running pell-mell toward the terrace, collided with one of the constables, shrieking and waving a crumpled note in her hand. It was a girl, no older than 10, her dress torn, her face streaked with grime and panic. She fought like a cornered animal against the constable's grip. "Let me go," she cried. "I have to find Mr. Holmes. He said he would help." Holmes was there in a flash, his hand light upon the constable's arm. "Let the child speak," he said quietly. The girl thrust the crumpled paper into Holmes's hand. I leaned in, catching the first words. "They took father. They're coming for me next. Table 12 was the signal." Holmes straightened, his face grave. He placed a reassuring hand on the child's shoulder. "You are safe now," he said firmly. But as he read further, his expression darkened. He folded the note swiftly, slipping it into his pocket. "Watson," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we are no longer chasing a disappearing man. We are engaged in a rescue, debut, and perhaps something far darker." I felt a chill, despite the stifling summer air. Somewhere beyond the sunlit facade of the Imperial Victoria Hotel, the game had shifted, and the players had revealed but a glimpse of the peril to come. Without another word, Holmes gathered the girl into his arms and strode toward the carriage rank. I hurried after him, my mind awhirl with questions, the distant laughter of the terrace patrons sounding now like the ghost of a world we had already left behind. In my heart, though I could not have said why, I felt a creeping certainty that the smiling man with no teeth was far closer than any of us dared imagine. Chapter 3. The rattling of the carriage wheels over the uneven London cobblestones filled the strained silence between us. Holmes sat across from me, the little girl huddled protectively at his side, clutching his sleeve with one grimy hand. She had given her name, Eliza Hart, but little else. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted about nervously, as if even the security of Holmes's presence might be snatched away at any moment. Holmes had not pressed her for answers immediately. He seemed to recognize, as I did, that the child was clinging to the last frayed threads of composure. Instead, he kept one hand loosely resting on her shoulder, a rare gentleness softening his usual precision. At last, as the cab lurched toward Baker Street, Holmes spoke, his voice low and soothing. "Miss Hart, you said they took your father. Tell me, Who are they? The girl swallowed, her throat working convulsively. I don't know, sir, she stammered. They wore masks, like the old plague doctors from the stories. Big black masks with long noses. They came at night. Her voice broke. Watson, stay rational, I told myself. It was all too easy to be carried away by the raw terror in her tone. Yet my medical training whispered another possibility. Trauma often fractures memory. Her account might be coloured by fear. Or it might be more literal than it appeared. Holmes, however, leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. And before that night, child, had your father received any strange visitors, letters, packages? Eliza nodded fiercely. He got a box, a little wooden one. He locked it up right away, said it was dangerous. Holmes exchanged a glance with me, brief but telling. Another box, another key, another mystery. And this box, Holmes continued, do you know where he kept it? She hesitated, then nodded again. In his study, hidden behind the bookshelf. I saw him once. He thought I wasn't looking. Holmes's lips curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. A useful habit, Miss Hart, he said approvingly. Seeing without being seen. The carriage rattled to a halt outside 221B Baker Street. Holmes scooped the girl easily into his arms, ignoring her startled gasp, and strode up the steps 2 at a time. I followed, heart pounding not only from exertion, but from the swelling realization that this case was rapidly growing beyond the bounds of ordinary crime. Once inside, Holmes settled Eliza by the hearth, summoned Mrs. Hudson for a hot drink, and then beckoned me toward the window, speaking in an undertone. Note, Watson, the symbolism repeated again. The box, the key, the message warning of false appearances. We are dealing with an organization, not a lone villain. And Miss Hart's father, whoever he is, stumbled upon something they are desperate to reclaim or suppress. I stared at him. But what, Holmes? What could possibly drive men to kidnap a scholar and send death threats disguised as riddles? Holmes's eyes gleamed. That, my dear fellow, is precisely what we must discover. And quickly, for I fear the clock is already against us. At that moment Mrs. Hudson entered with a steaming cup of cocoa for the girl and a telegram. She handed it to Holmes without a word, her face unusually grave. Holmes tore it open. I leaned over to read it with him. Sir, urgent developments concerning Mr. Hart. Come at once to Chamber of Antiquities, Regent Street. Trust no one. See Alderney. Holmes tapped the telegram thoughtfully against his palm. Interesting, he murmured. Our anonymous sender from Table 12 has a name after all. C. Alderney. And he wishes to meet where our vanished man's card directed us, the Chamber of Antiquities. But who is he? I demanded. How does he know us? And why now? Holmes smiled, thinly. All excellent questions, Watson. Which is why you shall accompany me, with revolver loaded, if you please. I sense we may require it before the night is out. We left Eliza safely in Mrs. Hudson's care, though Holmes spent several minutes verifying that every lock and window in the house was secured, and then set off once more into the thickening dusk. The Chamber of Antiquities was a grand, somewhat decrepit institution, its stone facade darkened by decades of soot and rain. By the time we arrived, the gas lamps along Regent Street had begun to gutter and flicker in the rising wind. Holmes rapped sharply at the massive oak door. A long pause followed, then a series of clicks from within, like bolts being drawn. The door creaked open just wide enough for us to slip inside. A man awaited us in the gloom, tall, thin, his face half hidden by the upturned collar of his coat and the low brim of his hat. He held a lantern, which cast long twitching shadows across the ancient relics crowding the hall. "See Alderney, I presume," Holmes said. The man nodded. "I have little time," Alderney said, voice low and strained. "They are watching even now. Listen carefully, Mr. Holmes." Hart was no mere antiquarian. He discovered unnamed Ito. A loud crack split the air. Alderney staggered, a look of astonished pain contorting his face. He slumped forward, and as Holmes lunged to catch him, I caught a glimpse of a dark dart embedded just beneath his collarbone. "Poisoned! It had to be! Quick, Watson!" Holmes barked. "Your kit, now!" But even as I fumbled desperately for my medical bag, I saw it was hopeless. Alderney's lips moved once, twice, then stilled forever. Holmes lowered the body carefully to the marble floor, his face impassive. Yet I, who knew him better than any living man, caught the faint tremor in his fingers as he gently closed the dead man's eyes. "Efficient," Holmes murmured. "Silent and final." He straightened, scanning the shadowy hall with narrowed eyes. Somewhere, hidden in the oppressive gloom, a murderer watched us still. I felt an involuntary shiver crawl down my spine. "What now?" I whispered. Holmes's voice was grim. "Now, Watson," he said, "we know two things for certain. First, that Hart stumbled upon something worth killing for." He paused, his gaze falling on a strange artifact, a polished obsidian mirror mounted on the wall behind Alderney's corpse. "And second," he finished quietly, "that the smiling man has already begun to move his pieces against us." I followed his gaze, and for a fleeting instant I could have sworn I saw a second reflection standing beside my own, mouth twisted in a smile I could not explain. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only the darkened museum, and the steady, measured breath of the man I trusted above all others, preparing himself for the game yet to come. Chapter 4. The air inside the Chamber of Antiquities had grown thick, oppressive, as if Alderney's death had disturbed some ancient, vengeful spirit that now watched us from the cracks in the stone. Holmes stood motionless for a full minute after the final rattling breath had left Alderney's lungs, his grey eyes scanning the gloomy expanse of relics and shadows. Then, with a sudden, almost electric precision, he turned to the wall-mounted mirror. "You saw it too, Watson," he said. "I hesitated. I thought I did." A second reflection. Holmes nodded, his face grim. "Not a reflection, Watson, a warning." He moved to the obsidian mirror, his fingertips gliding lightly over its slick surface. To my astonishment, the mirror wobbled slightly under his touch, not fixed in place, but hanging, suspended. Holmes withdrew a slender blade from his walking stick and slid it carefully along the mirror's edge. A soft click sounded, barely audible over the distant groan of shifting beams above. The mirror swung outward, revealing a narrow cavity in the wall. Inside, resting atop a faded velvet cushion, was a second black leather folder. Holmes withdrew it with a surgeon's delicacy. "The man at table 12 intended to pass this to us," he said, almost to himself. "Alderney was the second line of delivery, in case the first failed." I felt a slow chill creep up my spine. "They anticipated betrayal," I said. Holmes's mouth tightened. "They anticipated murder, Watson." He opened the folder with a snap. Inside was a single sheet of heavy parchment, densely packed with what appeared, at first glance, to be gibberish. Random letters, numbers and symbols, intertwined in a chaotic dance across the page. I frowned. A cipher! Holmes's eyes gleamed with rare excitement. "More than that," he murmured. "A map." He traced one long, slender finger over the document, pausing at intervals. "Note the sequence here." A repeating pattern hidden beneath the surface text. "It's not a simple substitution, Watson. It is positional, geographical. Whoever designed this map intended only those with precise knowledge to decipher it." "And you can?" I asked, half in awe. Holmes smiled thinly. "I can try." He extracted a pencil from his pocket and began methodically underlining characters, drawing faint connections between seemingly random points. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the faint scratching of lead against parchment, and the distant, uneasy groaning of the old building settling around us. At last, Holmes straightened, his face grim. "It is a location," he said, "an address, hidden beneath the clutter of distraction." He tapped a sequence of letters at the top of the page. "W.C., Ironwell Lane." "Ironwell Lane?" I repeated, puzzled. "I've never heard of it." "Few have," Holmes replied. "It is an alley buried deep in the oldest part of Whitechapel, a forgotten artery of London, and if I am not mistaken, the heart of our mystery." He folded the parchment carefully, slipping it into his breast pocket. "We must go, immediately. Delay is an ally to our enemies." I hesitated, glancing at Alderney's still form. "And the body?" Holmes shook his head. "Leave it. Scotland Yard will arrive soon enough. But if we wait for their plodding inquiries, the trail will vanish like smoke." He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his eyes burning with urgency. "Come, Watson. Tonight we step into the lion's den." We slipped into the night like fugitives, the gloom of London closing around us like a damp shroud. Holmes led the way at a brutal pace, weaving through back alleys and side streets, until the gaslights thinned and the smell of the Thames grew stronger. Ironwell Lane was no more than a crack between buildings, a narrow, crooked slit, barely wide enough for 2 men abreast. The air was close, heavy with the scent of rotting wood and stagnant water. Holmes paused at the entrance, scanning the shadows. I felt my hand tighten instinctively around the revolver in my pocket. "This is a trap," I said quietly. Holmes smiled faintly. Of course it is, Watson. The only question is, for whom? He moved forward without hesitation, and I followed, every nerve screaming vigilance. At the far end of the alley stood a battered wooden door, hanging slightly ajar. A faint, sickly yellow light leaked from within. Holmes pushed the door open with his cane. Inside was a single room, bare except for a heavy iron table bolted to the floor. Upon it, spread like a grotesque feast, were dozens of papers, artifacts, strange trinkets, and sure, d'hérité. And at the centre, a familiar object, the small wooden box Eliza Hart had described. Holmes approached it slowly. The box was about the size of a man's palm, carved with intricate designs and sealed with a tiny keyhole. Holmes removed the small key from his pocket, the one found in the original black folder, and inserted it. With a soft click, the box sprang open. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a single item, a ring, but not just any ring. It was massive, made of what looked like blackened silver, inscribed with symbols I recognized faintly from my medical studies, alchemical marks, ancient and ominous. Holmes's face darkened. "The Brotherhood of the Serpent," he said. "An ancient society, disbanded officially decades ago, but clearly its influence lingers still." I swallowed. "And Hart found this?" Holmes nodded, and paid dearly for it. He turned the ring over carefully. On the underside was an inscription, not engraved but burned deep into the metal. First the seer, then the blade. Holmes frowned. "A sequence," he murmured. "A plan already set into motion." I felt a chill creep along my spine. "And we are already too late to stop the first part," Holmes added. A faint scrape sounded behind us. Holmes whirled, but the doorway was empty. Still, the sensation of being watched, weighed, measured was unmistakable. Holmes pocketed the ring swiftly. "We must return," he said grimly. "There are deeper waters here than even I suspected. And the second move of this game is already underway." As we turned to leave, I cast one last glance at the deserted alley. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I glimpsed a figure at the far end, too tall, too thin, standing impossibly still, a glint of teeth, or perhaps the memory of a smile. Then the figure was gone, and we were swallowed once more by the restless dark of London. Chapter 5. We return to Baker Street in the small hours of the morning. The streets nearly deserted, save for the rare flicker of a constable's lantern, or the groaning of the wind along empty lanes. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent during the journey, his head bowed, fingers steepled beneath his chin, a posture I had learned to associate with the brewing of some intricate, dangerous theory. For my part, I found my mind unwilling to settle. The Brotherhood of the Serpent, a ring that bore a cryptic warning, a man who vanished in plain sight, a child fleeing unseen enemies, pieces of a puzzle, but no clear picture yet to guide us. At last, as we entered the warm, familiar gloom of our sitting-room, Holmes stirred. "Watson," he said, "I shall require the use of your medical instruments. It and your sharpest scalpel." I blinked at him, startled. "Good heavens, Holmes, whatever for?" He offered a thin smile. To dissect a deception, under Holmes's instruction, I retrieved my case and carefully sterilized the tools by the fire. Holmes, meanwhile, placed the serpent's ring beneath the bright light of his desk lamp, studying it with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "Observe, Watson," he said, handing me a magnifying lens. "What do you make of the band's inner edge?" I bent closer, squinting. At first glance, it appeared solid, but under magnification, I discerned a faint, almost imperceptible seam running along the underside of the metal. "A hidden compartment," I murmured. Holmes nodded approvingly. "Precisely. An inner ring, designed to rotate and reveal what cannot be left to mere surface inscription." With a precision that would have impressed any surgeon, Holmes inserted the tip of the scalpel into the seam and applied the slightest pressure. There was a soft click. The inner portion of the ring twisted, revealing a hollow space barely large enough to conceal a folded scrap of parchment. Holmes extracted it with tweezers, unfolding it with great care. Written upon it, in the same cramped hand we had seen before, was a list: Seer, Alderney Blade, Inspector Harrington Keeper, Eliza Hart Pawn. Holmes, I felt a jolt of unease. "Holmes," I said, my voice low, "your name, it's here." Holmes's mouth set into a grim line. "As I suspected. We are not simply investigators, Watson. We are participants in a design not of our own making." He tapped the second line with a long finger. "Blade, Inspector Harrington." The second move. I fear our enemies mean to silence him next. "But who is Harrington?" I demanded. Holmes rose, reaching for his coat. A bright but underappreciated officer at Scotland Yard. One of the few capable of independent thought. And, I would wager, a man who stumbled upon the Brotherhood's trail without realizing it. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with urgency. "Come, Watson. If we are swift, we may yet prevent the next murder." It was nearing dawn when we arrived at Harrington's, modest lodgings on Claremont Street, a narrow row of aging brick houses near the river. A heavy mist had risen from the Thames, cloaking everything in a ghostly pall. Holmes rapped sharply at the door. No answer. He knocked again, more forcefully. Still nothing. Holmes exchanged a grim glance with me, then produced a set of slender lockpicks from his sleeve and set to work with deft fingers. Within moments the door swung inward with a creak. The interior was dim, the shutters drawn. The air smelled faintly of lamp oil and something heavier, something metallic. "Watson," Holmes said softly. "Your revolver, if you please." I drew the weapon, heart pounding, and followed him inside. The sitting room was empty. A teacup overturned on the floor. A newspaper lay abandoned on a side table, fluttering slightly in the draught. Holmes moved swiftly, scanning the room, noting every detail, and then he stiffened. In the adjoining room, the study, a figure lay slumped over the desk. Inspector Harrington. Even from the doorway, I could see the blood pooling beneath his chair. A single knife, slender and cruelly fashioned, jutted from between his shoulder blades. Holmes approached the body with a grim set to his features. He examined the wound, the knife, the placement of the papers scattered across the desk. After a long moment, he spoke. "Watson," he said quietly, "note the careful staging. The attacker made no attempt to ransack the room, nor to conceal the body. This was not a crime of passion. It was an execution." I swallowed hard against the nausea rising in my throat. But why leave him like this? Surely they risk discovery. Holmes's lips curled in a humourless smile. "Because, my dear fellow, the message is not for Scotland Yard. It is for me." He pointed to the desk. There, scrawled hastily on the blotter in blood, were 4 words. Pawn moved. Your turn. We returned to Baker Street hours later, weary in mind and body. Holmes threw himself into his armchair with a force that betrayed his inner turmoil. I, too, felt the crushing weight of it all. The sense of being drawn into a game where every move had been anticipated, every outcome planned. Holmes sat in brooding silence, fingers steepled once more. Finally, he spoke. "We face a mind, Watson, unlike any we have encountered before. One who does not merely react to events, but orchestrates them." His gaze shifted to the fireplace, where the embers glowed like dying stars. First the seer, now the blade. 2 pieces removed, only the keeper and the pawn remain. I stiffened. "Eliza," I whispered. Holmes nodded, and myself. He rose abruptly, pacing before the fire. "We must move swiftly, for if the keeper falls—" He broke off, his face darkening. "The game ends not in our favour." Outside, dawn crept slowly over London, painting the soot-streaked buildings in a thin wash of grey. But within the walls of 221B, it seemed no light could penetrate the encroaching shadows. And in the silence between heartbeats, I could almost hear it, the faint mocking echo of laughter, a smile with no teeth. Chapter 6. The following day dawned brittle and cold, as if London itself recoiled from the grim events that had unfolded under its watch. A thick mist pressed against the windows of 221B Baker Street, turning the world beyond into little more than shifting shadows and uncertain forms. Holmes stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the milky grey. I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the restless tapping of his fingers against the windowsill. "We are down to 2 pieces," he said at last, his voice low. "The keeper and the pawn." "And you believe the Brotherhood will come for Eliza next?" I asked. Holmes turned, his expression unreadable. "Not believe, Watson. I know it. The message was explicit. First the seer, then the blade. By their own ciphered logic, the keeper is next." He moved to his desk, unfurling a large map of London across its surface. Several locations were marked with precise red dots. The Chamber of Antiquities, Ironwell Lane, Harrington's Lodgings, and now our own Baker Street. "Observe the pattern," he said, tapping the points. "A deliberate encirclement. They have been closing in on us from the start, like a noose tightening." A slow unease settled in my chest. "But why Eliza?" I asked. She's just a child." Holmes's fingers paused over the map. "No," he said softly. "She is the daughter of the true keeper." I stared at him, uncomprehending. Holmes folded the map away and met my gaze squarely. "Her father, Mr. Hart, was no mere academic," he said. "He was a custodian, the last living holder of a secret the Brotherhood has hunted across generations, a secret encoded within the object he hid, and now, quite possibly, within Eliza herself." "Within her?" I echoed, aghast. Holmes nodded. "It is a cruel but effective tactic. If one cannot conceal knowledge externally, one hides it where few would think to look, in the mind of a child." I shivered, not from cold. "And now," Holmes continued grimly, "they mean to extract it by force or by fear." He turned away, shrugging into his coat. "Come, Watson, we have precious little time." Holmes's plan was deceptively simple and characteristically bold. He arranged for Eliza to be hidden, not in the obvious safety of Baker Street, but rather in the bustling anonymity of the Covent Garden Hotel, under the protection of an old acquaintance, Inspector Gregson, whose loyalty was beyond question. Meanwhile, Holmes set his trap. We returned to Baker Street and left the front door conspicuously ajar, a dim lamp burning in the hall. Holmes instructed Mrs. Hudson to behave as if all was normal, to greet any visitor, but to mention casually that Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson are out for the evening. Then we waited, hidden above, silent as the grave, watching the front door through a narrow crack in the attic shutters. Time dragged. Every creak of the old house, every gust of mist against the window, seemed a possible intruder. It was near midnight when a shadow detached itself from the fog outside and approached the door. A figure, slight, cloaked with movements careful and deliberate. Holmes stiffened beside me. I strained to see. But the figure remained hunched, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The figure hesitated at the threshold, then slipped inside. Holmes motioned sharply. We crept down the servants' stair, silent as phantoms. Below, the intruder moved with eerie purpose, bypassing the sitting-room entirely and heading straight for the upstairs landing, and the small room where Eliza had stayed. Holmes struck first. He seized the figure from behind in a swift, practiced movement, dragging them backward into the light. A woman, middle-aged, severe of feature, her eyes flashing with furious defiance. Holmes spun her to face him. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The woman said nothing. Only a slow, chilling smile stretched her thin lips. A smile without warmth, without teeth. A smile I recognized. "The one who watches," she hissed. "The one who knows. You are too late, Mr. Holmes. The keeper is already claimed." Holmes's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You lie," he said coldly. "The child is beyond your reach." The woman laughed, a dry scraping sound like dead leaves stirring. "No," she whispered, "the child carries the lock. But the key has already been taken." Without warning she lashed out, sending Holmes stumbling back. I moved to intercept, but Holmes waved me off, already regaining his balance. "Let her go, Watson," he said grimly. "She is but a pawn herself. The true hand moves elsewhere." The woman fled into the mist before either of us could stop her. Back at the fire, Holmes stood brooding, his hand resting lightly upon the serpent's ring. "They have changed their game," he said. "They no longer seek to merely extract the secret. No, they seek to reshape it." I shook my head, baffled. But what could possibly be worth such lengths? Holmes stared into the fire. "Power, Watson, not the crude power of wealth or politics, but something older, deeper. The Brotherhood believes the secret can restore what they call the eye of the world. An ancient relic lost to history, said to grant unfathomable influence over men's minds." He turned, his face set with grim resolve. "And they believe Eliza holds the last fragment of knowledge to find it." A knock at the door interrupted us. Rapid, urgent, I moved to answer, and found Gregson standing there, pale and breathless. "Holmes," he said, "you must come. At once." I felt a stone settle in my stomach. "Eliza?" I whispered. "Gregson only," nodded. We raced through the fog-choked streets to Covent Garden. The hotel room was in chaos. Furniture overturned, the lamp shattered, and on the wall, scrawled in a child's shaky hand, were 4 words: "Pawn captured. Game ends." Eliza was gone. Chapter 7. The room seemed to close in around us. For a long moment, Holmes simply stood there, his face a mask of icy stillness, as he stared at the trembling words scrawled across the hotel wall: "Pawn captured. Game ends." Gregson shifted uneasily beside me. "There were no witnesses," he muttered. "No sign of forced entry. It's as if she disappeared." I saw Holmes's eyes sharpen, his mind slicing through possibilities faster than I could follow. When he spoke, his voice was clipped, controlled, yet I heard the steely anger beneath it. "Search every exit. Speak to every guest, every servant. Someone saw something, Gregson, whether they know it or not." Gregson nodded and hurried out. Holmes turned back to the wall, his gaze sweeping the ruined room. His fingers ghosted over the edges of the broken furniture, the splintered lamp, the abandoned blanket still warm from Eliza's small form. "Watson," he said quietly, "notice what is missing." I frowned, scanning the chaos. "Her doll," I said suddenly. "She carried it everywhere." Holmes's mouth curved upward in a grim smile. "Precisely. Our adversary has a perverse sense of theatre. They stage destruction, but they take only that which matters." He moved swiftly to the dressing table, where a battered leather-bound Bible lay open. A folded scrap of paper protruded from its pages. Holmes extracted it carefully. Written in neat, slanted hand were 4 coordinates, nothing else. He studied them for a long moment. Then he turned to me, his eyes alight with grim purpose. "An invitation," he murmured, "or a summons. Either way, Watson, we are expected." Carriage ride through London's fog-bound streets was a grim affair. Holmes sat rigid, his gaze fixed on the murky shapes flowing past the windows. I, for my part, could not shake the image of Eliza, alone, frightened, clutching her doll, dragged into darkness by unseen hands. I cursed my own helplessness. Holmes, however, seemed to feed upon it, growing colder, sharper, as if his mind required the pressure of crisis to reach its fullest brilliance. At last we drew up before a crumbling warehouse near the Limehouse docks. The building leaned against the mist like a drunken giant, its windows dark, its doorway yawning open like a mouth. Holmes stepped down from the carriage without hesitation. I followed, revolver in hand, heart pounding against my ribs. Inside, the air was damp and fetid. The wooden floor groaned beneath our boots. A faint light flickered deep within the cavernous space, and a figure stepped forward. It was a man. I knew, Inspector Gregson. For a moment I thought relief flooded Holmes's face, but it passed too swiftly to be certain. "Gregson," I breathed. "You found her." But even as I spoke, I saw the truth. Gregson's face, too pale, his smile, too tight, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light I had never seen before. Holmes moved only slightly, angling his body between mine and Gregson's. "You betrayed us," Holmes said softly. Gregson laughed, a low, broken sound. "Betrayed? No, Holmes. I simply saw the truth. You chase shadows, but they, the Brotherhood, they offer something greater. Knowledge beyond this petty world. A seat at the table when it all begins anew." I stared at him, horrified. "You helped them take the girl?" Gregson spread his hands, unrepentant, merely pointed the way. "The girl will lead them to the eye, and me," he smiled, "I will be rewarded." Holmes's expression did not change. "And what of me, Gregson? What of Watson?" Gregson shrugged. "You were never meant to live past tonight." From the shadows, several cloaked figures emerged, silent, purposeful, the Brotherhood's agents. Holmes glanced at me. A quick, calculating look. "A signal. Watson," he said. "You recall the lesson I once taught you about chaos?" I nodded tightly. "Good," he said. "'Cause some." Then everything erupted. Holmes surged forward, striking Gregson hard across the jaw, sending him sprawling. I fired my revolver into the air, the deafening crack shattering the warehouse's oppressive silence. The Brotherhood's men faltered. Just for an instant. It was enough. Holmes seized a hanging pulley and swung across the floor with astonishing agility, landing beside the burning lantern at the centre of the room. He kicked it over. Fire blossomed instantly, greedily devouring the rotting wood. "Run!" Holmes shouted. We fled, smoke and confusion covering our retreat. I heard shouts, curses, the crash of falling beams. Outside, Holmes barely paused, dragging me toward a waiting hansom cab hidden in the alley. We sped away into the night, bruised, coughing, but alive. Back at Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time. He unfurled the scrap of paper we had taken, the one with the 4 coordinates. His fingers raced across the map. "The girl is being held here," he said. "An abandoned railway station, Mayfair Junction, closed these 10 years, remote enough for their ceremony. isolated enough for their crime. He met my eyes, and I saw something there I had seen only once before, during the darkest days of our battle with Moriarty. Determination edged with fury. "We end it tonight, Watson," he said. "No more moves. No more games." Chapter 8. The night swallowed us as we raced toward Mayfair Junction, a relic of the city's forgotten veins, a railway station abandoned and left to rot when newer, grander lines had carved their way across London. I could barely make out the derelict outline through the heavy mist. The iron arches loomed like the ribs of some long-dead beast, rust flaking from their bones. The broken clock tower leaning drunkenly above the tracks. Holmes leapt from the cab before it had fully halted, motioning for silence. I followed, revolver in hand, every muscle taut. Somewhere within that labyrinth of stone and steel, Eliza Hart awaited, and perhaps the final pieces of a mystery that had bound us since the man at table 12 had vanished before our eyes. Holmes crouched behind a crumbling wall, surveying the station. "There," he whispered, pointing. A faint glow flickered from one of the boarded-up waiting rooms. Figures moved within, their shadows long and distorted by the flickering gaslight. Holmes's voice was a thread of sound. 5 men, 1 child, possibly more unseen. I swallowed. And the Brotherhood. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Preparing for their final move, he pulled a small dark object from his pocket. A canister of phosphorus powder. "A distraction," he said. "When the light blooms, we move. Aim for the child. I will handle the rest." There was no time for doubt, only action. Holmes struck the canister against the wall and hurled it through a shattered window. A violent flash of blinding white light exploded within the waiting room. Cries of alarm rang out. Shadows flailed. Holmes was already moving, a silent arrow through the darkness. I followed, heart hammering against my ribs. We burst into the room. The Brotherhood's men, momentarily blinded, stumbled back. Holmes moved with brutal efficiency, striking one across the temple with his cane, sending another sprawling with a savage uppercut. I made straight for Eliza. She sat bound to a chair, her eyes wide with terror. Her doll, or what remained of it, lay torn at her feet. I knelt, slashing through the ropes with my knife. "You're safe now," I murmured. "Come, quickly." Holmes dispatched the last of the Brotherhood's visible agents with a final, vicious blow. But even as he turned, a slow, deliberate clapping echoed from the far end of the station. A figure emerged from the shadows, not cloaked, not masked. Man in a simple grey suit, his hair silvered at the temples, his face calm, almost serene. He smiled, that same unsettling, toothless smile we had seen before. Holmes stiffened. "So," he said softly, "the Watcher steps into the light at last." The man inclined his head. "You are cleverer than most, Mr. Holmes, but cleverness cannot stop inevitability." His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of humanity. "Seek to protect the Keeper," he continued. gesturing almost casually to Eliza. "But the secret is already in motion. The eye will awaken, and London will belong to us." Holmes's voice was cold steel. "You built a myth around an artifact, a lie wrapped in ceremony. But it is not the eye you seek. It is fear, submission, a new order built on shadows." The Watcher's smile widened. "And you, Holmes, even you will kneel." Holmes took a single step forward. "You made one miscalculation," he said softly. The Watcher arched an eyebrow. Holmes's gaze flicked to me, and in that instant I understood. The phosphorus, the distraction, the chaos. We had not come to simply rescue Eliza. We had come to trap the Brotherhood itself. From the far end of the station, a whistle sounded, shrill, sharp. Constables swarmed from hidden entrances, dozens of them, pistols drawn, faces grim. The Watcher turned, and for the first time I saw something flicker in his gaze. Surprise? Holmes stepped closer, his voice low. "You thought you controlled the board, but the pawn, once moved, can become something far deadlier. A knight, a queen, a force the enemy had not foreseen." The Watcher made no attempt to flee. Instead, he raised his hand slowly, his smile never wavering. "You have won a battle, Mr. Holmes," he said, "but not the war." The constables closed in. Holmes said nothing, merely watching as the man was led away into the mist. Later, back at Baker Street, the mood was grim despite our success. Eliza, exhausted beyond words, slept soundly in Mrs. Hudson's spare room. Holmes stood at the fire, staring into the embers. I nursed a brandy, feeling the weight of it all. The deaths, the betrayals, the sense that though we had struck a blow, the true enemy had only just begun to reveal itself. At last I spoke. "Holmes, what now?" He did not turn. "The Brotherhood has been wounded," he said, "but not destroyed. The Watcher was but one branch of a tree whose roots run deep and ancient." I set down my glass, a sick feeling rising in my gut. "And Eliza?" Holmes's voice was softer then. "She carries a memory she cannot yet access, a memory buried by her father to protect her. We must guard her well, for others will come." He finally turned, his face shadowed. "And when they do, Watson, they will not come in masks and cloaks. They will come wearing the faces of men we trust, smiling, offering help, and behind every smile—" He let the thought hang, unfinished, chilling in its implication. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Outside, the mist curled around London's sleeping streets, hiding what horrors might yet slither through the cracks. And in the quiet of our rooms, as the fire burned low, I knew the game was far from over. Only now we had seen a glimpse of how deep the board truly ran. Chapter 9. The next morning dawned bleak and colourless, as if even the sun hesitated to cast its light upon the city. I found Holmes seated at the breakfast table, the untouched plate before him, testament to the grim turbulence of his thoughts. He stared not at the window or the morning papers, but at the ring, the serpent's Ouroboros, which now lay upon the table between us like a relic of some cursed past. "You are troubled," I ventured, pouring a cup of tea and pushing it toward him. Holmes did not move at first. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to meet mine. "There is a flaw, Watson," he said quietly, "a fracture we have not yet accounted for." I frowned. "You mean the Brotherhood?" Holmes shook his head. "No, I mean the corruption within Scotland Yard itself." He leaned forward, voice dropping lower. Gregson's betrayal was not the act of a desperate man approached in a moment of weakness. It was a part of a longer, deeper infiltration, an infestation. The Brotherhood did not merely target outsiders, Watson. They planted their seeds inside the very institutions meant to oppose them. I felt a slow, cold dread settle in my chest. "How far does it go?" I whispered. Holmes offered a tight, humourless smile. "Farther than we dare imagine. And worse, they have prepared contingency plans. Even now, moves are being made to discredit us, to strip us of allies, to erode the very foundation of trust upon which our efforts rest." He pushed a slip of paper toward me. It was a summons. "Official. Scotland Yard demanded Holmes present himself that evening to account for certain irregularities in recent investigations. They seek to neutralize me," he said, "legally, publicly, to leave us isolated." A grim thought occurred to me. And Eliza? Holmes's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table. Without protection, she would vanish into whatever abyss the Brotherhood commands. And the knowledge she carries would be theirs to shape as they wish. For the first time in many years, I saw Holmes not merely challenged, but forced onto a precipice between logic and desperation. He rose abruptly. "We must move, Watson, and not as before, not cautiously, but decisively. The time for shadows is ended." Our first destination was an innocuous building off Fleet Street, a dusty repository of legal records where Holmes had secreted away information too sensitive even for his own study. Inside, amidst the dust and old ink, Holmes rifled through the files until he found what he sought. A slim leather folio marked simply with a red wax seal. He broke the seal and extracted several documents, scanning them swiftly. "This," he said, handing one to me, "is the key to unmasking the next player." I peered at the parchment. It was a letter, unsigned, but its meaning was chillingly clear. An internal memorandum circulated within the yard, hinting at an alternative loyalty among certain officers, and referencing by code names several men Holmes and I both knew personally: Lestrade, Hopkins, Bradstreet. Some among them might yet be innocent. But now every connection was suspect. Holmes's voice cut through my horror. Note particularly the reference to the crooked gate. I scanned further. The phrase appeared in the letter, underlined twice: "Crooked gate secured, awaiting final passage." Holmes moved to the map pinned to the wall and jabbed a finger at a narrow, twisting alley in Whitechapel. The crooked gate is not a metaphor. It is a place. And tonight, Watson, it is where the Brotherhood means to end this game. By the time we reached the crooked gate, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving London shrouded once again in mist and gloom. The alley was narrow, crooked indeed, hemmed in by leaning buildings that seemed to huddle together like conspirators. Holmes led the way, moving swiftly, silently. At the end of the alley, a door, barely visible in the fog, stood ajar. Without hesitation, Holmes pushed it open. Inside was a single room, lit only by a solitary lantern hanging from a hook. And there, bound but unharmed, sat Eliza Hart. She looked up as we entered, relief and fear mingling in her wide eyes. But Holmes did not approach immediately. His gaze swept the room, alert for unseen threats. Only when he was satisfied did he move to untie her bonds. "You're safe now," he murmured. But even as he spoke, a slow clap echoed from the shadows. We turned as one. A second figure stepped into the light. It was a man we both knew. Inspector Lestrade, but something in his face, the tightness of his jaw, the gleam in his eyes, told me immediately that this was not the man we trusted. Holmes stood very still. "Lestrade," he said, "or should I say, the true watcher." The man smiled, that same empty, terrible smile we had come to know. "Very good, Mr. Holmes," he said. "The other was merely a proxy, disposable. I, however, I am the architect." Raised my revolver, but Holmes stilled me with a look. Lestrade, or the thing that wore his face, spread his hands. "You cannot stop it now. The Brotherhood has already secured the necessary mines. London's future is written, in shadow and fire." Holmes's voice was cold as steel. "And what of you? A pawn masquerading as a king?" Lestrade laughed softly. "Fall, Mr. Holmes, but ideas endure." Before either of us could move, he produced a small vial from his coat and hurled it at the ground. A thick, blinding smoke filled the room. By the time it cleared, he was gone, vanished into the night. Holmes knelt swiftly beside Eliza, lifting her gently into his arms. "We have what matters," he said. "The child lives. The secret remains beyond their reach." But his face, as he looked into the mist where Lestrade had fled, was grim. Very grim. Back at Baker Street, long past midnight, Holmes stood once more by the fire, watching the flames devour the serpent ring at last. I sat nearby, Eliza sleeping, safely upstairs, feeling the weight of what we had witnessed. "Holmes," I said softly, "will they return?" Holmes did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was scarcely above a whisper. "They never left, Watson," he said. "They simply changed their faces." The fire crackled, and in the silence that followed, I could almost hear it, the whisper of unseen footsteps still circling in the night. Chapter 10. The hours that followed were a study in tension. Holmes sat in his armchair, staring into the fire as if willing the flames to whisper answers. I paced the room, my nerves fraying with every tick of the mantel clock. Outside, London breathed in slow, heavy gusts. the city's heart beating unseen beneath the thickening mist. At last, Holmes stirred. "It is not over," he said, voice flat. "Not yet." He rose and crossed to his desk, where the charred remnants of the serpent ring lay amid scattered papers. Carefully, almost reverently, he drew from a locked drawer a slender envelope, one I had never seen before. It was marked with a curious symbol, a serpent devouring its own tail, intertwined with an eye. My stomach twisted. "Holmes," I said, "what is that?" He weighed the envelope in his hand. "The final move, Watson, or rather, the invitation to it." He slit it open with his knife. Inside was a single sheet of vellum, the ink so fresh it seemed to gleam in the lamplight. Holmes read, aloud, "The board resets. The pawn awakens. Midnight. The Library of Ashes." I frowned. The Library of Ashes? Holmes allowed himself a thin smile. "Not a real library, Watson. A colloquial name among the more secretive societies. It refers to the burned-out remnants of the Royal Bibliotheca beneath St. Dunstan's Chapel. Destroyed by fire decades ago, yet the vaults beneath were never sealed. An ideal place for a final gathering." He tucked the letter into his coat. "They believe themselves the architects of fate. It is time we remind them. Even kings fall to a patient pawn." We arrived at St. Dunstan's Chapel just before midnight. The ancient ruin loomed like a wounded titan against the swirling mist. Its once proud spire jutted brokenly into the sky, and beneath its charred skeleton lay a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. Holmes lit a hooded lantern. "Stay close, Watson. Tonight, truth walks with death." We descended. The air grew, colder with every step. The walls wept moisture, and the floor was slick beneath our boots. Somewhere in the unseen depths ahead, faint echoes stirred. The creak of old wood, the whisper of unseen breaths. At the bottom, a vast chamber stretched before us, blackened shelves crumbling against the walls, fragments of lost knowledge, scattered like bones, and at the centre, a circle of cloaked figures. At their head stood Lestrade, or rather, the thing that wore his face. Holmes stepped into the circle's edge, the lantern casting stark shadows. "You summoned me," he said. "I have come." Lestrade's smile was ghastly in the half-light. "You cannot stop it, Holmes. The eye awakens tonight." He gestured, and from the ranks of the cloaked figures a small form was thrust forward. Eliza. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes locked on Holmes with a fierce, desperate trust. Holmes inclined his head slightly. A silent promise. Then he turned his gaze back to the watcher. "You misunderstand one crucial thing," Holmes said. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the stillness like a blade drawn from its sheath. "You believe knowledge grants power, but knowledge, once exposed to the light, loses its hold over those it seeks to bind." He reached into his coat and withdrew the second envelope, the one found in the hidden cavity behind the obsidian mirror. "The Brotherhood's secrets," Holmes said. "All of them. Copied, preserved, and now placed where even you cannot reach them." He smiled, a sharp, wolfish thing. "At Scotland Yard. in the Chief Constable's own vault. And should I fail to leave? This place alive, they will be published to every major paper by morning. A ripple of unease passed through the cloaked ranks. Lestrade's smile faltered. Only for a second, but I saw it. Holmes pressed the advantage. You no longer hold dominion through fear. Exposed, you are nothing more than criminals. And history will treat you as such. The tension broke. One of the Brotherhood lunged toward Holmes, a dagger flashing in the dim light. He fired. The man crumpled without a sound. Chaos erupted. Holmes moved like quicksilver, striking, dodging, turning their numbers against them. I fired again, the revolver's bark deafening in the confined space. Eliza darted forward, straight into Holmes's waiting arms, and together we fought our way back through the crumbling archives, every footstep dogged by pursuit. We burst into the open air at last, gasping, blooded but alive. Behind us, St. Dunstan's seemed to shudder. And then, with a low groan, part of the ruined spire collapsed, burying the hidden entrance beneath tons of stone, trapping the remaining Brotherhood inside. Holmes did not look back. He pressed Eliza close, murmuring reassurances only she could hear. I stood, revolver still raised, heart hammering wildly, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what we had just survived. Holmes's voice reached me through the swirling mist. "Come, Watson," he said. "We have miles yet to walk before the dawn." At Baker Street, as the first sickly light of morning seeped through the curtains, Holmes poured 2 glasses of brandy. We sat in silence for a time. Finally, I ventured, "Do you believe it's over?" Holmes studied the glass in his hand as if searching its depths for an answer. "No," he said simply. I felt a chill deeper than any winter wind. Holmes turned his gaze to the window, where the city sprawled oblivious and unknowing. The Brotherhood is broken, for now. But what they sought, the eye, the idea, that remains. Ideas do not die, Watson. They slumber, they evolve. He set down his glass with a soft clink. And one day, when we have grown complacent, they will rise again. His voice dropped barely audible, and next time they may wear faces we dare not suspect. The fire crackled, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. And somewhere beyond Baker Street, London shivered in its sleep, dreaming dreams, sown in deeper darkness than even we could fathom. Chapter 11. The events at the Library of Ashes had left us battered but not broken. For a fleeting time it seemed as though the serpent had been beheaded. The Brotherhood scattered, their ceremonies crushed under the weight of truth and stone. But in Holmes's restless pacing, in the thin set of his mouth, I saw no triumph, only wariness. It was 3 days after our return to Baker Street that the final, most chilling revelation unfurled itself. As unexpected as a knife in the back, that morning a parcel arrived, unmarked, unadorned, no return address. Mrs. Hudson, wide-eyed with unease, brought it to Holmes with trembling hands. He studied the box for a long moment, then withdrew a thin iron rod from the umbrella stand and carefully prized it open from a safe distance. Inside lay a single item, a chess piece, the Black Queen. Beneath it, a note written in the same angular, slanted script that had haunted this entire case. You were never the player, Holmes, only the piece. Holmes read the note aloud, his voice like iron dragged across stone. I felt a cold sweat break along my spine. But how? I muttered. We defeated them. We exposed them. Holmes said nothing. He stared at the chess piece, turning it slowly between his fingers. After a long silence, he spoke, almost to himself. I feared it, he murmured, but dared not admit it. He set the piece down upon the mantel. The brotherhood we fought was real, but they were not autonomous. They were a fragment, a discarded mask. He turned to me then, and in his eyes I saw something I had witnessed only once before, during the black days following Reichenbach. True fear. There is a greater mind, Watson. One who orchestrated every move, every betrayal, even the downfall of the Brotherhood itself. I felt my heart constrict. Why? I whispered. What could they possibly gain by destroying their own? Holmes's smile was thin, mirthless. Evolution, Watson. Burn away the old skin to reveal the new. Strengthen the survivors. Ensure that when they rise again, they do so not as a crumbling cult, but as a refined, invisible empire. He tapped the Black Queen lightly. And we, my dear fellow, have been made part of their myth, the destroyers, the catalyst, the proof that weakness has been purged. The implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. We had not ended the danger. We had helped it evolve. That evening we sat once more by the fire, the shadows long and creeping across the walls. Holmes was unusually still. His violin lay untouched beside his chair. His pipe smouldered in the ashtray, forgotten. I find myself at a rare loss, Watson, he said at last. I looked up, startled. Surely you don't mean— He raised a hand. I do not mean surrender, only acknowledgment. The adversary we face now is not one that can be unmasked by footprints in the dust or cigar ash on a sleeve. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. They are an idea, an evolution. They wear no single face. Strike one down, and another will rise, not in the shadows, but in the very halls we once called safe. I swallowed hard. And Eliza? I asked. Holmes opened his eyes. They were clear, focused. She must vanish, he said simply. A new name, a new life. Somewhere far from London, from memory. It is the only way to protect her. And the knowledge she carries. And so it was arranged. Within a week, Eliza Hart became Eleanor Gray, ward to a distant cousin in Yorkshire, her history rewritten, her guardian sworn to secrecy under pain of ruin. I never saw her again. And though Holmes and I seldom spoke of her in the years that followed, I knew the memory of her remained. A bright, fragile ember buried deep against the encroaching dark. It was on the final night before her departure that Holmes received one last message. A simple envelope, slipped beneath our door while we slept. Inside, a playing card, the Queen of Spades, and written upon its surface, in tiny, precise script, "The next move is yours, Holmes." Holmes stared at it for a long time, then placed it carefully atop the Black Queen chess piece, still resting on the mantel. He said nothing, but in the flickering lamplight I thought, or perhaps imagined, that I saw the faintest of smiles curve his lips, not of amusement, but of grim, inexorable acceptance. The game, it seemed, was far from over. Only now it had entered a realm beyond our old methods, a silent war fought not with blades or bullets, but with trust and truth, memory and myth. Holmes rose, moving to the window. Outside, London sprawled endless and unknowing, its rooftops lost in the eternal, restless mist. I joined him, and together we stood, watching the first grey light of dawn stain the horizon. Finally Holmes spoke, his voice a whisper I almost missed. "Justice, Watson," he said. "No, not this time, only the illusion of it." And with that, he turned from the window, leaving me alone with the shifting shadows of a city that, I now realized, might never truly belong to us again. Chapter 12. It was 3 weeks after Eliza's departure, when the city shadows had begun to recede in the wake of a fleeting autumn sun. The streets of London seemed just a little quieter, as though the city itself had exhaled, relieved from the storm that had gripped it for so long. But I knew better. I had learned to trust Holmes's instincts, and they had never been more certain, more unshakable. The game, he had said, was not over. That evening, as the last rays of light drained away from the city, Holmes turned to me in the quiet of our sitting-room. The fire crackled, the warmth a comfort against the chill that had begun creeping into the corners of the room. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low but sharp, "it's time." I glanced at him, puzzled. "Time for what, Holmes?" He stood up abruptly, crossing to the desk where the Black Queen chess piece still lay in a place of prominence. His eyes scanned the room, pausing at the map of London on the wall. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned back to me. "The final move, Watson," he said. "It's not a matter of simply surviving or waiting for a confrontation. The true mastermind, the one who orchestrated this entire game, is still at large. But their next move is already upon us." I felt a chill run down my spine. It had been weeks since we had last encountered the Brotherhood, since Lestrade's treachery had revealed the extent of the conspiracy. But in that silence I knew something far darker loomed. Holmes walked over to the window, looking out over the rooftops of London, his expression hardening with each passing second. "Every piece on the board, Watson," he continued, "has been moved in such a way that only one thing remains. The conclusion, the last step. They have orchestrated everything to force my hand, to make me reveal what I know." I swallowed, my heart suddenly quickening. "And what exactly do you know, Holmes?" He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a cold intensity. "I know that this game has always been one of shadows, one of deception and illusion. What you see is never the truth, and the only way to defeat the architect of this entire scheme is to make the final move before they do. At that moment, there was a knock at the door, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the quiet. Without a word, Holmes moved toward it, his posture tense but controlled. He opened the door to reveal a figure in the doorway, cloaked in shadows. Took a step forward, instinctively reaching for my revolver, but Holmes stopped me with a look. "Holmes," said the man standing before us. His voice was hoarse but familiar, and I recognized him instantly. It was Inspector Hopkins, one of the few officers from Scotland Yard that Holmes trusted. But there was no warmth in his eyes. Only a quiet desperation. "Holmes, you were right," Hopkins said, stepping inside. I've just come from the yard. It's happening." Holmes remained silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving Hopkins' face. "Happening, you say? Do you mean to tell me that the true mastermind has finally revealed themselves?" Hopkins nodded grimly. "It's worse than that. They've manipulated the highest echelons of Scotland Yard. They've planted false evidence, forged documents, even implicated me in the process. They've framed us all, Holmes." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And now?" "They plan to expose everything tonight," Hopkins replied. "There's a gathering at St. Paul's, a meeting of sorts. They plan to make their final move there. They've engineered a collapse in the system, and if we don't act now, the city will fall into their hands." Holmes nodded slowly, his face hardening like stone. "We're going to the meeting, and this time, Watson, we're going to take the fight to them." The night was darker than any I had known, as we made our way towards St. Paul's Cathedral, the heart of this final confrontation. The city seemed to press in around us, the streets eerily quiet, and the air growing heavy with something I couldn't name. The finality of it all hung between us like an invisible noose. Holmes said nothing as we approached the cathedral, his mind clearly focused, his body coiled with purpose. The figures we passed on the street seemed little more than moving shadows in his eyes. We reached the doors of St. Paul's, which stood open, an invitation, an offering. And yet, as Holmes stepped inside, I could feel the weight of the centuries pressing down upon us. The cathedral, empty now of worshippers, felt like a tomb. Every step echoed. At the far end of the nave, a group of cloaked figures stood gathered, their faces obscured. The flicker of candles cast unsettling shadows across the stone walls. Holmes's voice broke the stillness. "I've been waiting for you." One of the figures stepped forward. It was a woman, tall and imperious, her face half hidden by the hood of her cloak. She raised her head slowly, revealing a face I recognized, though it took a moment for the name to fully crystallize. It was Eliza Hart, or rather, the woman she had become. "You should not have come, Holmes," she said, her voice cold and measured. "The game is over." Holmes looked at her with a quiet intensity. "No, the game has only just begun." As he spoke, there was a sudden sharp sound, the click of a mechanism, the shift of something in the shadows. Then, in an instant, a single figure emerged from the darkness. Lestrade. But this time there was no mask, no pretense. The man I had once trusted was standing before me, his eyes wide with a twisted, fevered excitement. He raised his hands slowly, as though in surrender. "You see, Watson," Holmes said softly, almost mournfully, "there is no ending to a game of this magnitude. There is only a new beginning, and you, my dear Lestrade, are the first of many pieces to fall." Lestrade's smile was slow, almost sad. "You've been played, Holmes. You and your precious Scotland Yard are nothing more than pawns in a game much larger than you can imagine. The eye will open, and London will belong to those who dare to see." Holmes turned, his back to Lestrade and the gathering. "The eye was always meant to blind, Lestrade, to blind those who believed in it." With a single gesture, Holmes pulled a concealed switch, and suddenly the room was alight with a blinding flash of light. For a moment the air was thick with confusion, and when the light faded, everything was still. Lestrade was gone. The figures in the shadows dissolved like mist. And in that moment I understood the game had not been lost. It had simply been played, once again, in silence, away from the eyes of those who sought to truly understand. What had seemed to be the final move was only the beginning of a far deeper, far darker game. One that would continue in the shadows long after Holmes and I had parted ways. Holmes turned to me with a quiet smile. "We may have won tonight, Watson, but the game is far from over."